Hello, and I hope welcome back to the show, Living with Climate Change. And today's show is going to be a state of the world and climate action. So there will be two parts of the show. First, we're going to look at just an overview of the state of our world now. I think this is important just to get the big picture and get a handle on where we're at, where we're going. I think that this will be helpful to you. And then the second part, we're going to look at what is being done about climate change on a global level. And is it enough? And so I think that this show is going to be good news, a positive message for all of us. I hope so. So let's get right into it. Now, I want to look back over roughly the last 100 years and just let's get an idea of how far we've come, how well human civilization has advanced and progressed, and I think that we'll find that we've done pretty well. Now, I'm going to start, let's go back just about to 1900 or so and see the state of our world now and where we're at. Okay, so now let's remember in 1900 there were about 1.5 billion people in the world. But let's just look at some of the main issues that we measure our world in advancements. Let's just child mortality. Now we know that that's gone way down. That is children dying before the age of 5 years old, and that has been reduced dramatically. Let's look at major things like famines. Now let's go back. Now there have been famines, of course, all through the ages. But I want to just go back to about the 1900 and see, let's just review the major famines that have happened in the world. Now, if we go back, well, let's go to 1876. Now, that was a bad time in the world. About 20 million people died of famine, of starvation. And of a world of, less than 1.5 billion people. And that was in China, Brazil, India, and Africa. A combination of those. These are just estimates, okay? There's nothing, these are general estimates that probably are true, more or less, But I think it's important that we look at this. So, now, besides that, let's go to about 1902. Now, there was a drought. There was a famine in India. Took about 2 million people died, and that was associated with drought and colonialism, of course. In 1907, China had a famine and about 25 million people died. So, let's put that in perspective of massive die-offs. In Iran, there was a bad famine in 1917, about 10 million. Russia, 1921, 5 million. China, 1930, 3 million. Russia, 1933, 8 million. China, again, 1936, 5 million people died of starvation. China again, 1942, 3 million. Iran, 1942, 3 million. Vietnam, 1945, after World War II, 2 million people died of starvation. Russia, 1947, 1 to 2 million. And China, in the Cultural Revolution, 1961, 43 million people died of starvation. And then the last really bad period in the world of massive mortality was in you could say Bangladesh, 1974, about 1.5 million people died of starvation. And Cambodia, of course, we had the killing fields, the Khmer Rouge, at least 2 million people died, starvation and just, murder. And then we had the Vietnam War at that time. So this was in a way, that was the last really horrible time in the world, I think, I could say. And, okay, since then, other than this exception I'll mention, also throughout this time there were other famines with hundreds of thousands of people that I just didn't mention. So you can see the struggle of just getting food in the world of the 20th century. Now, this is interesting. In 1994 to 1998, North Korea, they think that 3.5 million people starved. Probably more than that. But they're an isolated exception in the world now, as we know. So those are famines, and since then, we haven't had anything this terrible. Some, but nothing like that we've seen. So I think that's interesting to look at this. So let's just look at wars real quickly. Of course, there are many wars. Still are small type wars, but nothing like the 20th century. That we will look at is, of course, the world wars. World War I, 10 million people died. At the same time, 50 million people died of influenza. Young people. That's quite dramatic. In World War II, an estimated 70 million people died. And then in Vietnam, 3.5, probably more. And so since then, of course, we've had wars, but nothing like this. Nothing except one that I didn't really... The Congo had a war, and supposedly in 2000 that 3 million people died. I was so busy in my life that I don't remember that. Now so I think you can see as bad as things are, the Iran, but I think that the world has gotten better in this way, of course. Now let's look at poverty. 100 years ago, it's estimated that 75% of the world lived in poverty. Now, you could define what is poverty. I imagine that it's just the basic needs, people trying to survive. I need to say more about that. We still have poverty. But nothing like that. So we've come a long way, as 10% or more. There is poverty, of course, but we know that it is nothing like that. I mean, that is just 100 years ago. That's amazing. Let's look at other things that have, gotten better. Colonialism is what pretty much ended. Democracy, we could say, 2/3 of the world governments, democracy. Whether how well they run is a question, but violence and it has down, I think, really over the. If you think about how the world used to be, things are safer. Transportation now is so much safer. Let's look at natural disasters. So that's a big thing we're worried about in the future with climate change. But let's look back at the natural disasters. Of course, we won't go back too far, but the worst one, we go back to 1931. In China, there was a flood and it killed 4 million people. And of course, and I must say, some of those famines were related to drought. And then there were many. Besides that, there have not been massive casualties from natural disasters in the 21st century, and a lot of earthquakes, just mostly earthquakes. The Indian Ocean, 2004, I think that was a tsunami that was bad, killed 200,000. But pre-1900, there were I think there were bad natural disasters, and I think that's from just them not being able to know about it, or anyway. I think we can say that now is down, at least the deaths from it. Education is incredible now, 90% world literacy. Health and nutrition, at least we know so much more about it, health, and we have the ability, if we take personal responsibility to be healthy, and nutrition and is much better. And also in the past, plagues and things, which may be why the Black Plague and things, which may be why population remained low for so long. Technology, now the internet, just a wonderful thing for everyone. And most recently now is that I think is very promising for the world is what's called the sharing economy, or this peer-to-peer economy that is based on distributed power. And I think that has a lot of promise. And we won't go into that, but that is now, these are just things that I think we get lost, and we talk about how horrible the world is and humans, and we've destroyed the planet and all this. And I just think that we need to put this in perspective, that we have to realize we came from a world that was, people were trying to stay alive, starving, droughts, all these things, war, plague, all these things that just made life brutal throughout our history. And yes, we used our ingenuity and used this fossil fuel energy that we could get that was abundant, and just the density of the energy in oil is amazing, and people used it. Now, I think you have to realize, coming out of this type of a world, and people just used it and moved forward. Now, what is the environment has been degraded, no doubt about it, and but we know that the costs of all of our success is at the cost of the environment. But I don't think you can blame people for this. And it was a gradual thing, and you have to realize that, not even, I would think the mid-20th century, I don't think people thought of the world as limited in the resources. I don't know. I'm sure people were aware of it, but and there were in 1950 there were only 2.5 billion people. And that's why, yes, we developed into this carbon lock-in world, like I was saying last show. But I think that it's important that we see the world this way, in a rational way, and this is something else that I don't think is mentioned in the news too much. You get, our news is sensationalistic, and it concentrates on just silly events and bad things and things. And we get lost in these things. And I hope that, so I'm trying to bring awareness to things like this. And we have all kinds of problems, there's no doubt about it, that I'm not going to mention now. But, of course it's not a perfect world, but I think we've done pretty well. And, the environmental movement started in the 60s, with Rachel Carson's book. And I know that the United States has, did a lot back then in the 70s. And I think we've lost our way now, but I hope that we can change that. Now, on a global scale, I wanted to mention something that I thought would, and get your opinion on it. Now, we know that it's called the Kuznets curve, and it's the theory that, well, it's called grow fast, clean up later. And we know that we did that in our Industrial Revolution. And I'm worried about the developing countries, what they're going to do. The US and Europe, especially Europe, is doing well on pollution and things. But India, China, it's... So the Kuznets curve, it goes, it goes up, and then once everybody's happy with their needs are met and everything, until then they don't care about pollution. And obviously you can see this in the developing world. But when they get up to their developmental stage, where they start, then they don't want unhealthy drinking water and pollution, air pollution, all these things. And then they address them, and the pollution starts to go down and development levels out. And I think we can look and say that the North, or we call the West, or the developing countries, in general, we are at that point. We are comfortable, and I'm not going to get too much into this, but I think that we have a responsibility to, because a lot of the, if you agree that a lot of the climate change, especially the carbon emissions, are from our development. So we have a responsibility. And that's the argument of India, China, and they say, well, you grew and you're out of poverty and the problem's your fault, and now you want us to not grow. And they have a point. But we have to lead, and we have to help them. Now, that's quite hard when you have a president, especially in America, that is not going to face this. But Europe has done quite well. They know it. And anyway, you can see that given this problem, that is what needs to be done. Not only we change our energy systems mainly, and we deal with our emissions, but we have to help them too. Information sharing, and it's time that the world has to come together on this. And so that is also part of why I'm trying to help awareness of breaking down these divisions of people. And me, this little channel, what is it going to help? But it's everybody, you want to change the world, change yourself. Do whatever you can. And this is what I'm trying to do. All right, so let's now look at what are we doing about climate change? How is the world facing this on a global scale, or are we? So let's look at that. Now, the main governance, the international governance of the world is the United Nations, and as we all know, I hope so, who has 193 member states, almost the entire world, right? And it came out of World War II because of the horrendous state of the world. And it was so bad that something like this evolved, the United Nations. I know it's criticized and needs reformed, but it's all we have. And it's for international peace, human rights, and sustainable development mainly. But that's all we have right now. Now the IPCC is out of that. It is connected with the United Nations. And the IPCC report itself is looking at global response to the climate change, and it is looking at sustainable development and eradicating poverty. So they've integrated all these measures in the IPCC report. It's a monumental paper that is long, hundreds of pages, that does more than estimate or predict future temperatures. And I think we should be give them credit for this. The United Nations, you know, I'll mention a guy I like so much as Ted Turner, and he gave $1 billion to the United Nations. I think it was in the late 90s. And we need more guys like him. Anyway, so what else has the United Nations done? Well, they have created, in 2015, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is an updating of, in the 2000, the new millennium, if you can remember, we had the Millennium Goals, I think it's called. But this is, you know, this is the updated thing, and there are 17 goals. And let's look at, I want to show you a graphic of those right now, if I can. And so I hope you can see these. 17. And the number 1 is no poverty. 2 is 0 hunger. 3, good health and well-being, quality education, gender. And so you can see these. And I think you should note that and there's also a pyramid. The first 10 are the basic goals, and they are considered the foundation that needs to be set first. And those are all dealing with people and human rights. And then 11 through 15 are all ecological goals. You can see sustainable cities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land. And then the last 2 are considered like spiritual goals. Peace, justice, and strong institutions, partnership for the goals. Now, I don't know about I think you can argue what should be done first. And these are quite big goals. So I hope we're all familiar with these. I'll take them off the screen now. And now, so all of the governments of the 193 members of the governments in the world have been given these, and they're supposed to be working on them, and they're supposed to translate these goals into legislation. So this is being done. This is what the world is trying to do on a global scale. And I'm sure there's criticism. I'm sadly have to report that from my research that the U.S. is in the last place of, I'm sure, the major countries of doing anything with these goals and into legislation. Supposedly Europe has done well, and India's tried, and a lot of the other countries have tried, at least. Excuse me. And there was a U.S. agency, and it was called Project Everyone, and it was a project to communicate these goals to a wider audience. And I don't know what happened to that. Maybe you've heard of it. So that's what we have with the United Nations, and trying to fight climate change. So obviously these are, we have the IPCC report, we have the white paper of the Sustainable Development Goals with all kinds of information on how to do this. Now, so we can do this. We have the foundation. There are people in the world that are trying to deal with this and make the world as good as we can. And I think that the world is getting better and better. And I think we have to have hope and be positive and go out and work in the world to make it a better world and stop this division and the cynicism. I talk to people and they tell me how terrible the governments are and the corporations, and I don't know. Unless I know firsthand information, I'm not going to assume that everybody is evil. All these governments and everybody, they might be. But I'm not going to assume that and do nothing. So we have to be positive here and take action. And I never forgot John F. Kennedy, what he said. And I think we need leaders like that. And I hope they evolve. And I think we have I see this young lady that you probably know who I'm talking about, that I like. We need more like her, and we're going to talk about that later. But let's continue on with the show it's running on. Now, that's a major thing we have going. What else is the world doing about climate change? Now, we have something here that I'm familiar with. It's called the Deep Carbonization Pathways Project. And that's from 2013. And it is all about how to transition to sustainable energy systems. And I know about this because they offered a free class that actually the author, Jeffrey Sachs, a famous guy, he taught part of it, and it was for free, and it was online. And I took a class called Climate Action, Solutions for a Changing Planet. And I did that, and took my test, and got my little diploma. I tried to look it up, and I don't think I'm not sure if they have those anymore. That was a year ago. But it is a global consortium. And this is a global, an INGO. An IGO, right? As a government. And there are energy research teams, and they're working on this, how to do this. And there's just about 15 of the major developed countries are involved with this. And so that's another major thing that governments are trying to do. And it was, it's a tough thing to do, but they're trying. And I think I'm hopefully that you're aware of this. I think this gives us more encouragement. Now, I think those are the main ones that I know of. Maybe you know of more. And then we have a lot of NGOs like Sierra Club and Greenpeace that are trying to do things, but I don't know how. And all kinds of groups and that I don't know about, I'm sure. NGOs all over the world that we can be grateful for. Now, there's another thing that I think that I know about, It's the United States Green Building Council. They have, this is all about architecture that I know a little bit about. And they have this LEED rating system, and so that's a good thing. I took my test. I'm a LEED professional, LEED accredited professional. And so we know how to make buildings very sustainable with little impact. We know how. They're more expensive to do. That's why people don't do them, but we know how. And it is advanced. There's something that I know about that's been around, the idea, and there's not many of them, but there's actually, we know how to make living buildings. So, and they're not, I mean, they can look like normal buildings. They can be a house or anything that just function like an organism and are completely sustainable and create their own energy and deal with their waste and everything else. And they're amazing. I'm just saying that we know how to do this. And of course, there are net zero buildings and all these things. And I know that I worked for an engineering firm that was Belgium. And this was 5 years ago. And I remember they passed policy in Belgium that any new building, I think it was by 2020, any new building had to be net zero energy building. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that Europe is doing. And I just think, put that in perspective of America. My goodness. So this is further, I'm trying to establish our understanding of the problem and how we're dealing with it, and we have the technology. Now, there are other individuals, of course, doing things, people like Elon Musk, but I wanted to mention something that is I'm quite impressed with is this Paul Hawken guy. And he has a book called Drawdown, 100 Solutions to Reverse Global Warming. And so he has a website. And it is, these are amazing things that we can do in food, electricity generation, building, transportation, materials, all these things. So it is quite easy to reduce impact. Now, I know these things are expensive. I guess I don't know why they have to be, but they are. And as you're probably thinking, and is that our existing infrastructure all over the world is the problem. We aren't starting from scratch. And that's quite a problem to retrofit and upgrade, but it can be done. LEED is leading the way. It's changed a lot since I got my certification, and of course we can do, if you want to do something, make your home net zero. So let's wrap this up, and I hope that this was informative for you. So to summarize, I hope that you've been able to look at the world a little differently and see where we've come from and why we're in the position we're in, and to look for the future. And we can, I don't think it's hopeless. And I don't see any interest of just constantly dwelling on these, this stuff. And let's get to and quit shrugging off anybody that says we can do something about it. I hope that none of you are doing that, but I see that kind of, I feel it. That's it for this show, and next time I want to have a show on what we can do personally in our lives, and action that could be taken, and just kind of talk about those things. I think that might be helpful. Instead of not doing anything and worrying about it, we get to as much as we can. Okay, thank you. I think that's long enough for a show. I hope you've stayed with me, and I hope that it's been of use to you. And thank you for joining me, and I will see you on the next show. Bye-bye.